Hello, and welcome to the CAP Today webinar for Tuesday, March 28th. I'm Bob McGonnagle, the publisher of CAP Today, and I'll be your host and moderate a question and answer session after our formal presentation. Today's webinar is entitled IVD versus RUO. Is your laboratory relying on the right products? What you need to know to protect patients and your laboratory. Today's webinar is made possible by a special educational grant from Microbiologics. We want to acknowledge that and thank Microbiologics for their support that's enabling us to bring you this very important program. We have a single speaker today, Dr. Sebastian Gromminger. I'll say more about him in due course, right before he begins his presentation. But before we do that, I do want to go over some housekeeping tips that I've found useful to share with you. First, we often suggest you refresh your browser. We do also have live help available at a toll-free number anytime during today's session. You'll see that number in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, 858-345-5916. Also, below the slides, you'll see a box labeled Q&A. Now that, of course, is primarily for your questions and comments on the presentation for our speaker, but you can also use that box to let us know if you're having any technical problem, either with the audio or with the slides. And again, we have live help on hand to help you with those technical glitches. The full slides and audio of today's presentation will be available in about a week, and you can see it all again at captodayonline.com. It's a good thing to review, and you can share it with colleagues. Finally, you'll see some follow-up email from ourselves and likely Microbiologics, so I want you to know you might expect to see that. And my last housekeeping point is an important one. Do know that CAP Today does not endorse any product or service that may be mentioned in the webinar today. And of course, any comments of mine are purely personal and not to be taken as the policy of the CAP Today or the College of American Pathologists. And with that, now let me turn to our presenter and our presentation. Dr. Sebastian Gromminger is a doctoral scientist. He got his doctorate at the Helmholtz Research Center in Munich. He's a strategic expert in the field of in vitro diagnostics with a focus on molecular genetic diagnostics. He lives now in Constance, and he is a consultant for the approval of in vitro diagnostic devices at the Institut GmbH. And it's my great pleasure to welcome him, and I can ask him to begin now. Dr. Gromminger.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's a pleasure for me to speak here today about the topic you introduced, Bob. Thank you very much also for introducing myself personally. So we talk about IVD versus RUO and whether you are relying on the right product. What you will learn in this webinar in a few words. You will understand the meaning of research use only labeling and its consequences. You will understand the differences between US and EU and the implications using research use only labeled products. And we will identify what RUO products should be used for versus their potential misuse. And you will understand how IVD requirements compare to research use only requirements. And we will discuss the importance of choosing IVD products over research use only third-party quality controls. So, first of all, let us start with another question. What is an in vitro diagnostic medical device? So, let us start with medical devices. Medical devices are products for which the manufacturer states a medical purpose. And IVDs are also medical devices. So they are a subgroup of the medical devices in total. But they are slightly different. So IVDs are also medical devices which gain medical information obtained from human specimens. And that is a definition that potentially works all over the world, since this is derived from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum indicated below on this slide. So in the US, it is stated that IVD, in vitro diagnostic products for human use. IVD products are those reagents, instruments, and systems intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, including a determination of the state of health in order to cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent the disease or its sequelae. Such products are intended for use in the collection, preparation, and examination of specimens taken from the human body. These products are devices as defined in Section 201 of the FDA Cosmetic Act. So the FDA raised a few concerns a few years ago. It was stated here that FDA is concerned that the distribution of unapproved and uncleared IVD products labeled for research use only or for investigational use only, we will define that later, but intended for the purposes other than research or investigation, for example, clinical diagnostic use, has led in some cases to clinical diagnostic use of products with unproven performance characteristics. If I'm informed correctly, this was also the case in the Theranos scandal. So what is a research use only product? So this is sort of a labeling, warning labeling that the products shall be used for research use only, with a disclaimer not to be used for diagnostics or in diagnostic procedures. So that's similar to a warning on a road that the road is closed. So there's no way to use those products in a diagnostic procedure. So research use only, for this term there is no uniform definition. In general, they can be understood to be what the name implies, products to be used for analyses that are intended to be used for scientific research purposes only. They primarily differ from medical devices in that they cannot be used for medical purposes. So there is a difference in the definition in the EU versus the US. Let's start with the EU. That is defined in the METEF guidance 2.14/2. Research is only for a product to be categorized as an RUO product. It must have no intended medical purpose or objective. And it's stated somehow the other way around in the US. RUO means IVD product that is in the laboratory research phase of development and is being shipped or delivered for an investigation. And there is also another kind of product category, let's say, which is called IUO. What is IUO? It is for investigational use only. They should have a disclaimer that the performance characteristics of these products have not been established. And that is very similar to a warning that the road is not paved yet. And for this category of devices, there is also a definition in place in the EU and a similar one in the US. Let's come to that later. Let's again start with the EU definition. There it is defined that devices for performance studies means a device intended by the manufacturer to be used in a performance study, which is a study undertaken to establish or confirm the analytical or clinical performance of a device. That is outlined in IVDR Article 2. And on the US side, this category of devices is called investigational use only, IUO. An IUO product is an IVD product that is being shipped or delivered for product testing that is not subject to 21 CFR Part 812, which is the investigational device exemptions list, prior to fulfill commercial marketing. And you see this is derived from the FDA guidance distribution of in vitro diagnostic products labeled for research use only, or IUO. So laboratories very often ask the question to us consultants, is my laboratory service an IVD medical device? And to answer that question, let's again look into some definitions which are derived from the ISO 9000. There it is defined that a product is an output of an organization. And output is defined as the result of a process. And service is defined as output of an organization with at least one activity necessarily performed between the organization and the customer. So you see, as service is also defined as an output of an organization, it's also a product. And we can set product equal to service. So that means a laboratory service also falls under the definition of an IVD. An IVD is a product, a medical device, which gains medical information obtained from human specimen. But there's a conflict for medical laboratories, at least in the EU. If you think of a manufacturer providing a product to the medical laboratory, the manufacturer states this product is not intended for use in diagnostic procedures. It is for research use only. Then accreditation bodies and authorities state, please use CE IVD products. And the laboratories reply with, there is no adequate CE IVD product available, and there is also modification and automation necessary to provide the service to the particular patient group. And you need to know that lab-developed tests, or in-house IVDs, which it is called in the meantime in Europe, did not fall within the scope of the former IVD directive, which is currently being replaced by the IVD regulation. And earlier, it was stated that the directive, the old IVD directive, this directive shall not apply to devices manufactured and used only within the same health institution. So what happened in some member states, it was regulated, for example, in Germany and some other member states, but in others, it was not the case. And that is a conflict internally in the European Union. So let us see what is the difference if a laboratory is using CE IVD devices from the manufacturer in regular use versus the use of in-house developed tests or in-house devices. So in the normal situation, a manufacturer, a certified manufacturer, would provide CE IVD products to the laboratory, and the laboratory is accredited and puts these devices into service and provides the service. Then the patient comes to the physician with the symptoms, a sample is taken, it's being analyzed, results are sent back to the physician, and the patient gets treated or gets a treatment recommendation. And a similar scenario is a research use only provider, a manufacturer of research use only products, sends this product or delivers the product to the medical laboratory. And the medical laboratory takes over some of the development production steps to have those products ready for use in their validated laboratory procedures. And then again, the patient comes to the physician, gets consulted, sample is sent to the laboratory, analyzed, result is sent back, and the patient is treated or gets a treatment recommendation. So there is no difference for the patient and for the physician, and they may not even recognize that the product was originally a research use only product. And that is also difficult from the patient's and user rights position. What was the reaction of the EU? It was the in vitro diagnostic medical device regulation. And there it is stated that service to persons in the EU, for service to persons in the EU, it is essential that devices used in the context of a commercial activity to provide diagnostic or therapeutic service to persons within the Union comply with the requirements of this regulation. So that means if you have a laboratory service, the service needs to comply with the requirements of the IVDR. But there is some conflict because there is flexibility required. As outlined earlier in my talk, this is necessary for the laboratories. That's their stakeholdership. And you see this reflected in the recital number 29 in the IVDR. Health institutions should have the possibility of manufacturing, modifying, and using devices in-house, and thereby addressing on a non-industrial scale the specific needs of target patient groups, which cannot be met at the appropriate level of performance by an equivalent device available on the market. That's difficult to prove, but we will see. First of all, it is necessary that we define the purpose of the organization. If the purpose of the organization is care or treatment of patients or the promotion of public health, we can easily set equal a medical laboratory to a health institution. So this is something the medical laboratory should state in its quality manual, for instance. And there is a definition in the EU for in-house IVD medical devices. In-house IVD devices an in-house IVD device is a device that is manufactured and used only within a health institution established in the Union and that meets all conditions set out in Article 5, subpoint 5 of the IVDR. And in the US, this is called a laboratory developed test. A laboratory developed test is an IVD that is intended for clinical use and designed, manufactured, and used within a single laboratory. So pretty much the same definition, but not referring to particular articles or requirements. But we should think from A to Z in this case, since there is not only one product used in a laboratory process. It starts with the patient population, the indication, and then a specimen is collected and the samples need to be handled. They need to be transported, they need to be stored. They will be prepared in the laboratory and there will be pre-analytics and quality controls performed. And then the analytics take place. After that, an analysis and the reporting. And after reporting, the results are sent back to the patient via the physician in the vast majority of cases. And then we have several products which are placed in that process. Product A, for example, a specimen collection set. Product B, an extraction kit. Product C, an assay. Product D, an analyzer. And product E may be a software. And there may be also other products, but these are very often the products used in combination to achieve a result for the patient. So if one of the or several of these products are research use only labeled, what are the consequences using RUO labeled products? We have a very recent medical device coordination group guidance in place in Europe from January this year. There it is stated that research use only products are not regulated by the IVDR and are not considered to be in-house devices when they are used for research purposes only. So if you do research, there is no limits. However, where a health institution ascribes to a research use only product an intended purpose such that it would meet the definition of an IVD in Article 2, subpoint 2 of the IVDR in view of its use in the health institution, then Article 5, subpoint 5 applies. I will show you what this means in a second. And national legislation on quality of care may also apply. And in-house devices may include RUO products as components, provided that the resulting in-house device complies with the requirements of Article 5, subpoint 5. And this is a very recent guidance, so this is quite important for laboratories located in the European Union. So what are these Article 5, subpoint 5 requirements? So first of all, these lab-developed tests, or we should better call them in-house IVD devices, must comply with Annex 1, which means the general safety and performance requirements of the IVDR. That is already a long list of requirements to be fulfilled. And in addition, it is not allowed to transfer these devices. This is to be applied with the amending regulation from 25th of January in 2022, already since 26th of May 2022. You see it red down at the bottom right side. You will understand what the colors mean here. So red means no transfer is allowed to other legal entities. So if a laboratory is another legal entity, it is not allowed to transfer the product to this other entity. And this is already valid since 26th of May last year. The most requirements are postponed until 26th of May 2024, indicated in gray. That means a proper quality management system needs to be applied, which should cover aspects of ISO 13485, at least look into Chapter 7, product realization. And the laboratory must comply with the requirements of ISO 15189 or a respective national accreditation solution. And subpoint E, the laboratories need to provide information and rationales to authority regarding the manufacturing, modification, and use of the devices. And they also need to provide sort of a declaration of conformity. They need to provide extensive documentation on manufacturing design and performance, which is true at least for Class D, but also for all other classes, dependent on the decision of the member states. And the products must be manufactured in accordance to these specifications, and they need to collect experience gained from clinical use and apply corrective action that's so to say equal to post-market surveillance. And the only point that is postponed until 26th of May 2022 is the comparison to competitor IVD devices. So there is a few years more time to use, so to say, in-house devices without comparing them to competitor CE IVD products on the market. What is accepted use of research use only products? As we have no such list in the EU available, I will show you what is defined in the US so far. During the research phase of development, the focus of manufacturer-initiated studies is typically to evaluate design, limited scale performance, and issues such as usability of the test. Some examples of products FDA will consider to be in this research phase include the following: tests that are in development to identify test kit methodology, necessary components and analytes to be measured, instrumentation, software, or other electrical mechanical components under development to determine correct settings, subcomponents, subassemblies, basic operational characteristics, and possible use methods. And reagents under development to determine production methods, purification levels, packaging needs, storage conditions, and others. What is a misuse scenario of research use only? Misuse is indicated if any written or verbal statements or records suggest that the products are for clinical use or for clinical investigation. And that is critical because that is easily stated on a congress, for instance. So take care what you say and what you write. If it's suggesting validation for lab developed tests or any targeted sales to clinical labs, and that's the reason why I state here that records can also suggest a misuse. If you have only clinical laboratories in your list of clients, this is critical. And your customers should not only be clinical laboratories, and in the case that they are clinical laboratories, I would add a statement or even a contract that these customers do not use the product for diagnostic purposes. And if anyone would provide a specialized technical support for example, to validate the test or any validation services, that would be a critical scenario. And due to lacking controls, such misuse poses significant hazards for operators, patients, and manufacturers. So I will remember you regarding the statement in the MEDDEV guidance here. Research use only in the EU is defined as for a product to be categorized, it is stated there, for a product to be categorized as an RUO product, it must have no intended medical purpose or objective. So again, take care what you say and write. So what are the requirements from research use only to IVD? And for this we have a polling question. Will you take over?
Thank you. Yes, we see the polling question there for you. Can we put that polling question up and see how people answer? What type of quality control materials do you use in your laboratory? Check all that apply. And you see you have a number of choices there. And there's a fairly interesting spread between and among IVD, RUO, patient samples, and a few who don't know. Very interesting results. Okay, we'll take that down, and I'll ask Sebastian to resume. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So let us have a view on those product categories. Let us start with research use only, which have nearly no regulatory requirements. And then there is a category of devices at least defined in Europe, which is called for general lab use only. And the category of for performance studies only compared to the US definition for investigational use only, where the devices have not yet established the analytical or clinical performance characteristics. So all the safety aspects and general requirements outlined in Annex 1 of the IVDR, for instance, have to be fulfilled for these products. But yeah, obviously they cannot have the final analytical and clinical performance characteristics. This is then true for the CE IVD products. They have established also analytical and clinical characteristics. And the regulatory requirements are increasing from left to right, and also the documentation efforts. So these documentation efforts increase very much on the right-hand side, and there is not only those few requirements on the CE IVD level regarding analytical and clinical performance data. There is also the post-market surveillance activities and the vigilance activities and all the other articles, unique device identification, a lot of requirements that have to be fulfilled for IVD products. And there are other applicable regulations which are independent of being an IVD or research use only. There is the REACH regulation, which defines requirements for chemicals and limits the use of chemicals. And there's the machine directive, which is to be applied for products with moving parts, and the low voltage directive for electrical devices, and also electromagnetic compatibility directive. Another question is how to choose the right product. And therefore, we have another polling question. Bob, would you take over?
Yes, thank you, Sebastian. And this question is as follows. Have you had difficulty finding IVD quality control products for your assays? And you can see here we have a distribution, and quite a few people, in fact, a majority, have had difficulty finding IVD quality control products for assays. Interesting results. We'll end that now, and I'll ask Sebastian to continue on.
Thank you again, Bob. Very interesting. So let us see what happens during the next few years in the EU. So the step one for medical laboratories is to comply with the general safety and performance requirements, here abbreviated with GSPR, which are outlined in the Annex 1 of the IVDR. So the laboratories declare the products as in-house IVD devices. With this, they can be safe for some time until May 2024, where they have to provide an in-house IVD documentation according to Article 5, sub-point 5, as I have been talking about a few slides earlier. And the third step is either switching to CE IVD products available on the market, or provide evidence of superior performance of their own in-house IVD devices. And this is from May 2028 on. And what will happen? So currently the laboratories ask for CE IVD products on the market, or start the Annex 1 conformity assessment, or hopefully have started the Annex 1 conformity assessment, because they need to comply with that requirement already since May 2022. And what we currently see is that laboratories connect via working groups. In Germany, there is, for instance, the AWMF group providing also templates for IVD, in-house IVD documentation. And in the second phase, or the second step, the laboratories wish to be supported with documentation for research use only products. So they will get back to the manufacturers of research use only products, and that they shall provide them information and study data, at least analytical performance data, so that they do not have to reinvent the wheel and do the same job a second time. And from May 2028 on, competitors with CE IVD solutions will appear on the market. And at some point in time later, the authorities will force laboratories to use CE IVD products if they are available with reasonable performance. And that can be easily be monitored as soon as the EUDAMED is fully functional and all CE IVD products, since they have passed the transitional periods that are currently in place. And there are some recent activities in the US as well to regulate laboratory developed tests. But it was very surprising. The Valid Act was introduced to the Congress in 2028 and to the Senate in 2022 to regulate the in vitro clinical tests. That's how they called it. However, in late December 2022, this was excluded from the Consolidated Appropriations Act in 2023. And thus the future of the Valid Act is unclear, and with that also the regulation of in vitro clinical tests. So there are some statements available saying that in the US, researchers only products can be delivered to medical laboratories. It can be used in lab-developed test scenarios for several years in the future, but we don't know what will happen. So stay tuned. So let's look at IVD over researchers only third-party controls, what products you should use. So what happens using third-party research use only controls? In this case, the laboratory is fully liable in case of wrong results and in case of incidents. The laboratory needs to make sure that the assigned values to those controls are correct and metrologically traceable. And if you're using third-party IVD controls, this is different. In this case, the manufacturer is liable in case of wrong results and incidents that are caused due to quality issues of the control. And the manufacturer needs to comply with harmonized and recognized standards demonstrating conformity. For example, the metrological traceability, and that the values are assigned correctly. So then at least some of the quality control aspects or regulatory requirements are transferred to the manufacturer, and the laboratory is not solely responsible. And if you would do that with all the products used in the examination, if you're switching to CE-IVD products and they are all compliant and can be used in combination, the laboratory can validate this new procedure using all the data provided by those manufacturers for the CE-IVD products. So let's conclude. The EU regulates in-house IVDs in clinical laboratories. IVD medical devices must be preferred over RUO if the performance of the IVD is sufficient for the clinical purpose. And in the USA, CLIA labs can continue with lab-developed tests and using researchers only products as components therein. And when you're applying novel test technologies, RUO products can be components of LDTs or in-house IVDs in Europe as well. And using IVD devices instead of RUO products puts the manufacturer in responsibility and the products under better control. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and for taking part in this webinar. And I will hand over to Bob again.
Thank you, Dr. Gromminger. That was a wonderful presentation, very comprehensive, and I'm sure everyone in this audience will want to see this in a replay, which you can see in about a week on captodayonline.com. We'll share the full slides and we'll share all the audio. And while I ask Sebastian to take a moment to catch his breath, let me remind you, if you have questions or comments, you can type them in to the Q&A box below the slides. I know that we have an audience composed of both European laboratorians and North American and United States-based laboratorians and representatives of IVD companies that work on both sides of the Atlantic and in Asia. So we have a mixed audience. I want to make sure we do our best to ask questions that quite clarify everything here and reiterate it so that we'll all come away with the right understanding. So my first question, I wanted to ask the following. If a laboratory uses a CE-IVD quality control material with an assay, are there fewer validations, less paperwork, and less studies needed on the part of the laboratory if they were to choose that CE-IVD material over RUO materials?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, in the case that the laboratory is using research use only products, they need to provide documentation, for example.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and in addition, they need to demonstrate and ensure the batch-to-batch variation, and that the batch-to-batch variation is unproblematic, and also the repeatability and reproducibility characteristics are not established for researchers only, and this is critical. And some of these aspects you can expect from an IVD manufacturer, and it's also important to ask the IVD manufacturer about the analytical and clinical data for these products.
Thank you very much. So in one sense of the word, just to clarify, would you consider an RUO label with nothing else attached on a product to be a certain warning for a clinical laboratory that was contemplating its use?
Yeah, for sure. It is a warning that that you cannot rely on the quality of these products, and the next batch can be different. So there is no guarantee that the product that you're using today is also working properly tomorrow.
Thank you. Now, this is a question that's widely asked on, I think, everywhere where labs are run under some kind of regulatory schema, or, of course, where they're developing tests. So let me ask this. What are the consequences for a laboratory using an RUO material when an IVD-approved material is available?
So I guess for all over the world, it is the same that in the case of using RUO products, the laboratory is fully responsible for wrong results and in case of incidents. If you're using CE IVD products and you can clearly demonstrate that wrong results or incidents are caused by these IVD products, then the manufacturer is at least partially, maybe also fully responsible for wrong results. And this is an important point. In the EU, it will be different from May 2028 on. From this time point on, laboratories are obliged to use CE IVD products if the performance is sufficient for the patient population. So therefore, we have some time in the EU to prepare for that situation.
Thank you. Would you say, Sebastian, that the EU directive and the timescale that it's on, has that been widely accepted and has been seen as not too onerous for either labs or manufacturers in the EU?
So with the new transitional period in place, we see that it is accepted. However, we see differences. Some laboratories and some manufacturers are well prepared for that situation, and some are not. Some are using the time for other purposes. So therefore, it's a matter of prioritization. And yeah, at least to my opinion, I would be the early bird to comply with the regulations, because I don't think that this will change again.
Very good. Thank you. Let me ask you another question here that's very interesting, and again, it's, I think, widely shared, so I'm very happy to ask it of you. Is it compulsory to use third-party IVD quality controls on the analyzer, even though the analyzer manufacturer offers their own IVD-approved QC material?
That's a that's a challenging question. So that means the manufacturer has its own material for quality control, and there is a third-party product available on the market. Did I understand that right?
Yes, indeed. And then is it required to use that third-party product then, when there is one available?
Yeah, I mean, if the third-party material is CE IVD labeled and the intended purpose fits to the use in combination with the particular device we're talking about, then yes. But I'm curious why such a manufacturer would not declare those control materials as IVD. This could only be the case if the instrument or the device which shall be controlled is itself not an IVD. That is for research use only or for general lab use.
Yes. I think in part what the questioner is getting at is what we often in North America call the activity of quality assurance, which is rather different than pure quality control, with this idea that we take an extra step or might use an extra quality control just for our own quality assurance purposes. Do you see that sometimes in Germany?
Yes, we do see that in Germany as well. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, very good. I hope that clarifies things. I have another question here, and this is of interest to the people who look at the scientific literature quite a bit. Is there any value or credibility attached to LDTs or IHIVDs that have gone through peer-reviewed publication?
Yeah, that is certainly true. Yeah, you could use peer-reviewed publications where the particular device is or was used as an input to your performance evaluation. So the primary source should always be a clinical investigation, a clinical study. But if there is sufficient clinical data, valid clinical data available in the public domain with the particular product and the particular version of the product and the particular product combination, so there are several aspects to be considered. If that is all true, you can also argue that the performance evaluation is based on data from peer-reviewed scientific literature. But you can at least use that for defining the medical and the technological state of the art in your performance evaluation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, several people have raised the question, and I think this is in particular in relationship to the the IVD directive in the EU, talking about no transfer being allowed. And this we also have with LDTs as a question often. We have so many large systems and complex testing environments that one part of a site is really part of this very same organization. So the question is no transfer allowed for sites that are part of the same organization in which there is an established LDT or IHIVD?
Mm-hmm. So for IHIVD, I can state that it is possible to share the product if a part of the laboratory is under the same organization. That could be the case, for instance, if a laboratory has two sites. One is in city A and the other one is in city B, but they both belong to the same legal entity. For instance, a GmbH in Germany, that would work out. But as soon as they are part of a large laboratory group where each laboratory is itself an own legal entity, then this is not allowed to share. It's not allowed to share the products over to others, to other sites if they are own legal entities. What you can share is a protocol. You can share the IP, the intellectual property, how to perform the test. But then you can share the order information, but they need to order the research use only product or raw material on their own. That's possible, but not the pre-established or manufactured products. They cannot be shared from laboratory to laboratory in the case of different legal entities.
Thank you. And of course, if you are using the IVD or the LDT in a different laboratory within the same system or on a different analyzer, that still needs to be validated for that specific site and instrument, correct?
Absolutely true. Very, very important point. Thank you, Bob. So any deviation, differences from laboratory to laboratory need to be revalidated. Yeah, but that's less effort than a complete validation of a test. It's a revalidation that falls under the aspect of reproducibility, inter-laboratory testing.
Yes, absolutely. Because the same is true for completely cleared FDA approved or CE marked products as well in that particular situation.
Yeah, absolutely true. If
of course.
The IVD product would allow to use different analyzers, for instance, they will maybe provide some validation data for a small number of instruments. But for example, in the PCR world, we have several devices on the market, and if you choose one which is not yet validated by the manufacturer itself, a revalidation needs to be performed if the manufacturer opens this possibility.
Very good. And also another question, just to clarify, for manufacturers of RUO products themselves cannot make diagnostic claims or specifically market to clinical laboratories for clinical testing use. But to clarify, labs can use RUO products in their development of an LDT under CLIA. Is that correct?
That's true. So in this case, the manufacturer of the research use only product should take care not to state anything related to clinical use for patient use. So these are buzzwords not to be used. So they should take care. But the laboratories have freedom to use these terms and claims as soon as they are fulfilling these requirements outlined in Annex 1 and in Article 5, Subpoint 5, if we look into the European side and also to the FDA requirements on the US side.
Very good. And again, just to clarify, you very clearly and nicely discussed the RUO versus the IUO definitions at the beginning of your lecture. Is it true that labs can create LDTs or IVDs also using IUOs in addition to RUO products?
Sure, they can do so. In this case, they have much more confidence that the standards are being used during development. They can be sure that certainly design control aspects have been followed. And I would ask these questions as well. How much did the manufacturer stick to these requirements already? And some kind of confirmation that the Annex 1 requirements have been fulfilled. You can ask for a checklist regarding the Annex 1 compliance. And that could help out to understand what is already done with those products having the status of performance evaluation only or for investigational use only.
Very good. Here's an interesting question for you. My lab has used an LDT product for over a year that's gone through all the required analytical validations to diagnose patients. All patient reports have on them a disclaimer that says this is an LDT method not intended for diagnosis, but that we're using the LDT in that manner, that is the manner for diagnosis. Is there something additional I need to do? I believe I'm still following all regulatory requirements. I believe from a U.S. point of view, it would be wise to have a clinical validation of this LDT product if it were to be used on patients for diagnostic purposes. Would you agree with that, Sebastian?
I would absolutely agree. So
Yes.
there is both analytical and clinical validation to be demonstrated, and also the scientific validity of the analyte. So you need to prove that the analyte you are using in this lab-developed test is related to the disease in question and to the indication of the patient, and that's very important. So I call these the three essential elements of performance evaluation. And as a fourth aspect, you also need to demonstrate the state of the art. If you go overseas to the EU, it always starts with you need to comply with the acknowledged state of the art. That means even for a lab developed test, or let's call it in-house IVD, you need to comply with the current standards. That means ISO standards, that means CLSI standards. They have to be applied, even though it's only a lab developed test or an in-house IVD.
Yes, very good. And I appreciate that final point. And with that, I will give you the last word. I want to really thank you for a very clear exposition of not one, but really two systems for us now, with RUOs, IUOs, lab-developed tests, in-house IVD devices, and to give us a good sense of what the CE directive is meaning in Europe, because it will have big impact, I think, also on product development that we'll eventually see here in North America and the United States in particular. Let me just remind you all that you can review this on captodayonline.com. In about a week, we'll have it fully posted. And if there's further questions that we didn't get a chance to follow up with, I'm sure that our friends at Microbiologics will take all of them under advisement and help you get a very good and clear answer. And we're also happy to offer that service for you ourselves insofar as we can. So with that, I'd like to begin to wrap up. And of course, first, I want to thank Dr. Sebastian Gromminger. And he gave a wonderful, wonderful talk today. We're very grateful for that work that he's done in the presentation. I also wish to thank Microbiologics for their special educational grant and sponsorship of today's program. It's really a wonderful service that they're providing to laboratories everywhere to do this kind of work for us. And finally, I want to thank all of you who have joined us today online. It's a huge crowd. Well over 1,000 folks are on today. And I just wanted to make a particular thanks and express my gratitude for you taking the time to join us on today's CAP Today webinar. So to sum up, I want to thank Dr. Sebastian Gromminger. I want to thank Microbiologicals. And I want to thank all of you in the audience. And with that, I will bring today's webinar to a close.